So you're put onto these puberty blockers.
To do that to a child is barbaric.
Kirabel went through an assessment process.
She elected to go on those hormones. She elected to have a double mastectomy when she was 20 years old.
She gave her informed consent to that treatment and then later regretted it.
Myself and Kira both started when we were 16.
So that's quite late in comparison to what they're recommending now.
Of course, everyone will say, oh my goodness, 14, 15, 16, much too young for that. Excellence in transgender care is switch off their natural hormone production as soon as they are ready.
Kirabel had a very unfortunate regret of, her voluntary kind of procedures.
And this is a very good point, and it's not one that's made very often.
I think it's important to note how extreme it is to block puberty.
Puberty blockers are completely reversible.
Yes, it's reversible because when it wears off, your testicles and ovaries just wake back up again.
It's really unfortunate that she regrets that the detransition rate is often less than 3%. And that means that she is the exception and I am the rule. It's very rare to meet a child who's been on puberty blockers earlier than the age of 14 in this country due to waiting lists and kind of limitations.
Everybody is talking about what age does a child know that they're transgender, what age are they able to consent to treatment, what age are they able to start puberty blockers, what age should they start gender-affirming hormones, and everyone's like alarming, saying...
To do that to a child is barbaric, really.
There's no other treatment that we would give a totally healthy child that disrupts normal physiological development.
The reality is, by the time you have accepted your own gender identity as a child or young person, by the time you've managed to get your parents on board and involved, then you get to go and see your GP and have to do the whole journey with your GP to get your GP accepting and on board. And then you get referred to the NHS clinic. That takes a long time, the sitting on that waiting list. Then you go through a very long assessment process. And then maybe at the end of that, you're able to access gender-affirming medication. It takes years.
Myself and Kira both started when we were 16, so we were both adolescents. We were outside of being children, actually.
So what Stephanie's saying here is really relevant. And, we have Kirabel saying that she was given treatment too early or inappropriately, or she shouldn't have given her consent for that treatment, even though she did. And what Stephanie's saying here is that they both didn't start till 16. And so all these people worried about whether a young person can give informed consent to their own medical care. The reality is that the age is over 16 anyway.
I think the thing I really want people to understand, so puberty blockers are completely reversible. It's the cross-sex hormones that bring in irreversible changes.
Are they reversible?
Puberty blockers are simply a direct copy of a hormone that we produce naturally in our brain that switches on or off the testicles or ovaries, which allows the testicles and ovaries to produce hormones. So if you give a puberty blocker, it switches off your testicles or ovaries. When the puberty blocker runs out, it's an injection and it runs out after 3 months or 1 month, depending on which one you have. When it runs out, it hasn't got any effect on your body at all, and your testicles or ovaries will wake up again and start producing hormones. So yes, it's reversible because when it wears off, your testicles and ovaries just wake back up again.
So puberty blockers, you have to be on a puberty blocker and you have to be monitored for a minimum of 12 months before you can be considered for a cross-sex hormone. And you're heavily monitored.
So what Stephanie's talking about here is the NHS protocol that she obviously went through. And for some reason, the NHS decided to do this. And it's completely at odds with any other clinical protocol or clinical guideline that I've seen in transgender healthcare, where you have to have a puberty blocker for a year at least until you are allowed to have your cross-sex hormones or your gender-affirming hormones. And one of the points that Kirabel often makes is that she was plunged into a menopause.
Had menopausal symptoms like night sweats, hot flushes, brain fog, and then you have the genital issues as well that come with it.
And that's what happens when you give a puberty blocker to somebody who's already in puberty. It switches off your hormones just like that. And that is just like a menopause when you're 50 years old and your ovaries stop working and you're plunged into a state of no hormones. But this was something that the NHS, no one's really got quite clear where they got this idea to do this from. You must have puberty blockers for a year before you start hormones. It's not evidence-based. It's not in any of the other clinical guidelines. And it has caused a lot of problems. Of course, the Or the solution is to say, okay, well, this person, we need to switch off their natural hormones and then give them a replacement hormone. And then, of course, everyone will say, oh my goodness, 14, 15, 16, much too young for that. But actually, excellence in transgender care for transgender children is switch off their natural hormone production as soon as they are ready and then replace it with the opposite hormone as soon as they are ready. And that should be a discussion of informed consent between that person and their doctor and hopefully their parents, if their parents are on board.
I was referred by a GP to them, saw them for maybe like a couple months, and then I was referred on to the gender identity clinic. There was no, hey, have you thought about this, or just what you would expect.
Kirabel had a very unfortunate regret of, her voluntary kind of procedures.
And this is a very good point, and it's not one that's made very often. Kirabel gave consent to having blockers, to having testosterone, to having an operation, to have her chest removed. Kirabel went through an assessment process. Kirabel gave the answers that satisfied the criteria for gender dysphoria. She gave her informed consent to that treatment and then later regretted it. And now seems to be on a campaign to influence transgender healthcare for other transgender people. And is being given quite a loud platform to do that.
So since then, I've just kind of been speaking out and trying to make people aware of the situation.
But there will always be instances of regret. People who underwent some kind of medical treatment and then regretted doing that. But what I think is a real shame is then using that regret, your own personal regret of giving informed consent to a treatment, to then try and impact the availability of care to hundreds of thousands of other people. That's a very big undertaking, and it's having a very big effect.
All we want is a seat at the table. All we want is to be given access to the people who are making the decisions. In terms of pausing the puberty blocker trial, talk to the parents of trans children, talk to former trans children. Don't just see one side of any argument.
And this is really important, and I've heard this countless times. Who are we asking here? Where are the actual trans voices in all of this? Where is the voices, the opinions, the stories from transgender children, transgender adolescents, older adults? Where are the voices of their parents, their families, the people who have been through this? What effects did treatment have on them? Was it good or was it bad? What would have happened if you had had access to treatment back in the day when you were younger? And these are the voices that we need to listen to. And there's so many trans people out there desperate to give that opinion, desperate to share their story, but desperate to inform the future of transgender healthcare. And yet, for some reason, those voices don't seem to want to be heard.
She elected to go on those hormones. She elected to have a double mastectomy when she was 20 years old. And it's really unfortunate that she regrets that. But the detransition rate is often less than 3%. And that means that she is the exception and I am the rule.
And another beautiful point put so wonderfully by Stephanie here. The statistic that Stephanie's used here is 3%. So 3% of people regret. And as we've seen, that's a much lower regret rate than many other procedures, knee operations, hip operations, breast augmentations. It's a very, very low regret rate in medicine. And what we mustn't do is make that regret rate affect 97% of people. So 97% of people won't regret the care and 3% might regret the care. But why should those 97% be stopped from having the care that they want, that they need, that will change their lives, might save their lives, simply because 3% might regret having done that? That statistic is shocking, and we need to listen to it. I have so many questions about Kirabel. Why is it that someone in the 3% is apparently speaking on behalf of the 97%? Who actually funds Kirabel? Did you know that her funding came through a crowdfunder? She was represented by Sinclair's Law. Now, there's some interesting history of those people. I'm encouraging you to do your own research there. But there are so many questions about Kira which we need answers to. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a deeper dive, and I'll go into more detail. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video's helped you, and I think you're going to like this one that's on the screen right now.